Okay, thank you guys so much for picking my sunflower online pre-recorded class. I know some of you can't make it to some of my classes that I will walk you through step by step, and I can interact with you because of all schedules and everything, because people are still working at this time or they couldn't get the material on time, which I know it's hard lately getting everything. So I wanted to try these pre-recorded classes. So I just want to thank you guys so much for supporting me in my business. Because of these classes and everything, you guys are actually helping me stay alive during this difficult time. So I really can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys. So since I asked everybody what classes that we should start with, a lot of people said the sunflower. So we will be having pre-recorded classes for all of the classes that we offer, but this will be our first. So I am going to start with painting on my slate, but you can paint on almost anything. You can paint on canvas, slate, wood. Some people had paint, but they didn't have anything to paint on, so they were actually using old cutting boards that they didn't use anymore, and then they were putting them in their kitchen. So that actually was very pretty. So keep in mind, you do not always have to paint on the same thing every time. You could always be a little creative with it. When it comes to these painting classes, you never have to do exactly what I'm doing. I'm just showing you how I do it, and then you can create your own and you can have fun with it. When it comes to working on slate versus canvas, there really isn't too much of a difference. If you are working with canvas, you will have one extra step of just painting the background black. So in this, I will tell you when you're supposed to paint it black, but I won't be doing that. I'll be doing a different step in the meantime. So I just want to cover a couple things before we start. A lot of people always ask me, well, what type of paint do you use? Do you spend a lot of money on your paint? Do you buy the most expensive paintbrushes? The answer is no, I do not. I actually shop at Walmart for a lot of my painting supplies. I use apple barrel paint. I like it. A big tube like this, which is 8 ounces, is $2.50. They do sell them at Michael's, but they do charge a lot more for them. So it is the same brand, just is a little bit cheaper at Walmart. The other thing I like about this is you can get it out of certain material if you don't let it fully dry and go through the wash. If you, like, say, drop a drop of this on your couch or anything while you're working, like I usually do, if you just take a wet paper towel and you just clean it up really quick, it will not stain or stay in. If you do let it sit for, I think, over 24 hours, then you can't get it back out. But if you do notice ahead of time, you can get it back out. So if you have kids, this is the one I definitely suggest, and it will come off of anything. Instead of using paper towels over and over again, I actually use a dollar store drying mat, which has a little bit of a cushion, because with the slate, I'm afraid of it scratching my coffee table. So if you do end up using slate, this is a nice thing to have, and it's just $1. And I have dollar store rags that I reuse and wash over and over again. It doesn't get all the paint out because this is over 24 hours, but instead of wasting paper towels over and over, that's what I like to do. And a lot of times I actually don't use water like most people. I will blend on top of my canvas or the slate. But I find it, unless I'm going from, let's say, doing the black background to the yellow, I usually don't try to take the paint out of my paintbrush. I usually leave it in place, and that helps me with the blending. I do have water here just in case I need it, but usually I won't use it. So that's another tip that I have. So with the first step that I usually do once we go into painting is I usually draw everything out ahead of time. So I'm just going to turn this a little bit so you can see almost my entire slate. Oh, the other thing is, a lot of people ask me where I do get my slate. You are able to buy some on Amazon, but they are fairly expensive. Usually they're like $14 to $25, if not more. I actually get all of mine from around town. I will look at Facebook Marketplace. I will look at Let It Go, Offer Up, all those sites. There are a lot of contractors that have these from a cleanup job that they had, or they ordered the wrong size. I actually got, I think, 80 to 100 of 1 foot by 2 foot for like $200. So I got a ton of slate because somebody messed up and bought the wrong size. So you do not have to spend a lot of money on slate or canvas. This is great. And a lot of times people are trying to get rid of them because they have them just laying around their house. So definitely check out those things if you want slate. Plus they're very easy. You can either drill with a drill bit, or you could take a little bit of like a nail and you can hammer it in it and it will create a hole for you, and you could put leather to hang it up or rope or anything you will. So it's great for a really inexpensive project. So for the slate pencil, I can't see, so I like to use chalk. For a canvas, you could definitely use pencil, and I'm actually going to flip mine over because I want the holes a little bit towards the top of it. So for the sunflower slate, I usually like to try and keep it on to one side. I always have it on the right. You can do the left. So I always do half of it. And what I do is I will take my chalk and I'm going to make my circle. And I try to keep it almost perfectly in the center. And how I usually check is I will take my fingers and I will measure it, and I'll go to the other side and measure it again. And I'm a little bit off, so I just know I have to come out a little bit more. So I'm just gonna open up just a little bit more. Now, if you are using pencil, don't worry if you start having lines like this. I never just do a full turn like this. It never works out. So don't worry, all paint you can cover up. If you make a mistake with your paint, don't worry, you can cover it up. If you are on canvas, it's easier to cover up. If you're working on slate and you get paint on a part of it, you can always just take a wet paper towel and you can scrub it right off if it's wet. If it's a little bit dry, it's harder to do. I don't think it's impossible, but it's a lot easier to take off when it's wet. So then what I would do is I'm going to draw the petals, and I'm going to take the petals, I'm going to go to the side. And for this one, it's a little bit more square than I usually have. So the side is going to be a little bit, this one's going to be cut off a little bit more. And I'm going to go around. Okay, and then what I usually do is I just, again, double check the sizes, and I go through here. This one's a little bit short, so I'm going to make this one a little bit longer. Now, they do not have to all be uniform. Having them slightly different or turned a little bit or skinnier or fatter, that just makes it more natural because most flowers are not completely uniform. And then I'm just going to keep going. Okay, and then for this one, I'm actually going to put petals in the background. You don't have to, you could leave it just like this. But I'm going to, and I'm going to just put them right in the background. And then once I do my sketch, I always try to take a step back a little bit and look at it and make sure this is exactly what I want and everything like that. This is actually pretty good. I might just make mine a little bit taller just so it takes up more of my workspace, because I don't want to leave too much slate exposed. I just think it looks better. And then once you're done, the next step, all you have to do is you're going to paint the background black. When you're working on canvas, a lot of times if you have a white background, you're going dark, you always need to have 2 layers. So don't worry if the first time you put paint on that you start seeing the white color coming through. Don't worry if we're going to put on a second layer. Another thing is when you do put paint on, and everybody makes this mistake, especially if you're the beginner, and sometimes I still make this mistake, do not put too much paint on your canvas. The less paint you have, the quicker it will dry, so you can move on to the next step, and it won't bleed into the next step. If you do come across where you do end up putting too much paint, you did make the mistake, and you're waiting for the dry, and you either want to keep up with the class or you just want to keep going because you're having fun, you're under a time crunch, having a hair dryer, which most of us have in our home, is one of the best things to use, or turning on your ceiling fan. Hair dryers are much quicker than the ceiling fan is, but ceiling fans work as well. So that's one thing. A lot of times when I do my paintings, I will usually say put about the size of a dime of paint on your palette. And if you know that you're going to use a little bit more than that, like for the background, which is black, you would do a size of a quarter. It is much easier to add paint to your palette than it is to put the paint back into your tube. Plus you'll save a little bit of money, and it won't get as it won't get dried out as it won't get gooey, and then you won't waste it, because a lot of this paint, especially acrylic, will dry pretty quickly. So while you are doing the background, I am actually going to paint mine white, because if I don't with the slate, the gray will actually start to come through. So you guys will paint the background, and I'm going to paint the inside of mine white. Also, when you are painting on the background, always remember, especially if you're working with canvas, specifically stretched canvas, or even slate, you always want to do the sides of it. Stretched canvas, if you paint the sides of it, you could hang up right in the wall as soon as it's done and it's dry, and you don't have to worry about framing it. If you don't do the sides, then you're gonna want to frame it, and sometimes framing could be a little bit expensive. So I always like to do it just to give people the option of having it framed or not. So that's always something good to keep in mind. Also, when it comes to putting on a second layer, if you do put on a little bit more and you start to see that your paint isn't fully dry and it's still a little bit tacky, do not put on a second coat. Wait for it to fully dry. If it is a little bit tacky and you start to paint over it, you will start pulling up the paint underneath, and you'll start seeing globs, and you will actually, no matter how much more paint you put on, then you might still see, depending on how dry it did get or how much you did pull up, sometimes you can see that ring still underneath, and there's almost no way to cover that up. So please keep in mind to try to keep your paint as thin on your canvas as possible. If you see streaking, try to just pull it onto the next one and just use that paint. Also, another reason why you want to keep your paint as thin as possible is usually by the time you start from one end and you go to the other, by the time you're done with this side and you want to go and do the second layer, this side will be already dry. So you don't have to have too much time waiting for it to dry. Sorry, I'm just trying to find a sweet spot so you can see my whole painting. And I should have mentioned this before, if you are painting the background, do not paint inside the flower, because the black will be a little bit harder to cover up. If you did make that mistake, do not worry about it. I would take your white paint and just go over the petals like I'm doing here. And that way, when you do put the yellow on, the black doesn't fully come through. And you probably would need about 2 coats of the white paint. So if you did do that, don't worry, you didn't make too much of a mistake. There's always ways to cover it up. That's the nice thing about paint. You could always fix it. Okay. Now, since I was able to make everything very thin, I don't know if you can kind of tell in my with the camera, this side is actually perfectly dry. So I am able to start on the second coat on this side and work my way this way. Okay, so I am actually going to wait a little bit while my paint dries. So I'm going to pause the video, and once it is dry, I'm going to come back and I'm going to work on my next step, which is the yellow. So if you are working with canvas right now, you would just let your background fully dry, make sure that there is no bubbles specifically where the yellow is going to go, and I'll be right back. Okay, I am back and my painting is all dry. Hope yours is dry too. And we are going to go on to the next step, which is putting the yellow down. So I'm going to put about a quarter size of yellow onto my palette, and I am just going to go over the entire thing. If you are on canvas and you have a black background, and excuse me, if you do go out of the lines with the palette, or I'm sorry, with the petals, don't worry, because at the very end, when everything is fully dry, you can either fix that with the yellow and make part of that a part of the flower, or you can always go over it again with the black and cover it up, almost like an erase marker. Okay, now while that is drying, I just want to go over a couple tips on our next step. So when it comes to painting a flower and almost anything that you're painting, you always want to paint from the farthest point to the front. I know a lot of people like myself, they want to paint the details first because that's the most fun part. I totally understand. I'm the same way, but you have to paint the details last. So if you were looking at a painting and like for our black, that's our first step because that is what's in the background. So we did the black part and now we have to go towards the back of the petals. So the petals that you painted in the background, those are the ones that we're going to paint first. Also, because it's farther away, it's going to be darker. So what we're going to do is if you look at a flower, you want to go from the base to the end of the petal. This is going to be darker and the outside is going to be lighter as well. So when you're doing the back of the petal, you're going to have, you can think about it, it's kind of hard to see with mine, but here's the back of one. So if you can imagine it, right here is going to be a V because these two petals are on top of this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the base with a darker color and we're going to pull upwards, and then the outside is going to be the lighter color. So I'm going to teach you how to blend the colors together. Now, one of the biggest things that most people do is they put a lot of pressure on their paintbrush. When it comes to blending, you do not have to put that much pressure. The pressure you're probably going to think of is by if you were taking a feather and you were going to go tickle somebody, that's about the pressure you're going to use. So try to do it light as possible. When you do it as light as possible, the edge of your paintbrush with all those little all the little the brushes, the all the little pieces, that will start to, all the bristles, you'll start to see some of the lines because you're using just the very tip. You're not using the whole thing to make it a solid color. So when you are using those little bit of lines, because you're using the very tip of it, that's when you're going to start to see the lines and you're going to start to see the colors blend a little bit. And those lines will be in the shape of the petal. So you'll start seeing, like if you ever look at a flower petal, there are thin lines in it. So that's just, it's going to just simulate that. So I'm just going to wait for mine just to dry a little bit. So I'm going to put it back on pause. So you're not fully waiting for me. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and while I was away, I did notice that my flower was a little bit off. So I just made the petals just a little bit bigger with the white, and I am going to fix them later when I get onto the petals that are on top. So the next step is, like I said, we're going to do from back to the front. So we're going to, I'm going to go from my right side because this is the most dry, and I'm going to do part of the back. I am going to skip the first one because this one is a little short, and I'm going to skip this one because I just worked on it, and I'm going to go to this one, which is going to be my farthest one back for this one. So if I look at it, this one's on top, this one's on top, so is this one, and so is this one, so this is behind. Normally I would start from my right side and move forward, just because I fixed it. It's not fully ready just yet, so I'm going to do this one. So I'm going to pull this a little bit closer. Now I'm going to, depending on what type of flower you want, I'm actually going to do the orange. If you wanted to have the darker shade of sunflower, I was using the burnt umber brown, and it's the same instructions. It's just a different color, so you can pick any type of color you want. So I'm going to pick the orange, and I'm going to give myself a little bit more yellow. I'm going to start from the farthest spot, and I'm going to move up. Now remember, this is going to come straight down here, and this one is going to go over here. So if you do go past where the other petal is going to come in, do not worry, because we're going to be covering that up later. Now for the back petals, I do like to go a little bit farther down, because sometimes your petal doesn't line up exactly where you want to, and this will cover it just in case. So I'm going to start with the orange, and then I'm going on the bottom, and I'm going to pull it up. And this, when it gets here, this is where I'm going to lightly start pulling up. And then I'm going to take my yellow, and I'm going to go from the top, and I'm going to pull back down. Now, because I do have a little orange on my brush, you're going to start to see that it is going to start turning yellow a little bit, but don't worry, because the more you do it and the more it dries and you go over it, and you'll start seeing it to lighten back up. And I'm going to start pulling the yellow down, and that will start to change the color of the middle. And sometimes this does take a couple steps, so don't worry too much. Now you do want to try to keep some of the orange on here, because that is what we're going to consider as the dark color. So when we do put the light color on top of this one, the dark color will look like it's behind it. So for this one, I'm just going to keep it how it is. I'm going to let it fully dry, and it looks like a total mess right now, but that's okay, because the more layers you put on it, you'll start seeing it come alive. It does take a couple layers for it to really come in. So I'm just going to go on to the next one, and I'm going to do the same thing, go in the V, and I'm going to start pulling my way back up. I'm going to take my yellow, and I'm going to pull it back down. I'm going to go to the next one and do the same thing. And this is the same step we use for all the petals. And this is a little hard to do. So if you are having a hard time with it the first time, don't worry, practice makes perfect. And let's say that the first layer is absolutely god awful, you can't stand it, you did something wrong, you want to start over. Don't worry, you could always start over by painting it white again, and you can go on top of it if you don't think that you can cover up the color as well. And that one, just because I had the white on there and I didn't have enough, I'm going to go over that a couple more times because my background is starting to come through because I didn't have that good base like I wanted. And I'm going to go back up and do this one. And I do know that I have another one here. Even though it's hard to see on that side. And I think I might actually have the top one come out just a little bit more. Since this one is coming out, I'm going to just add a little bit of white that might cover up my base a little bit. And I think I'm going to do that with this side too. Okay. And while this fully dries, I'm going to do the same thing over again. You might have to do 2 or 3 layers until you get it right. So I'm going to pause it while mine dries. And I will see you guys in a minute. Okay, so I'm back. I am going to go on to doing the second layer on this. So let me take my brush. And I'm actually going to take a little bit more yellow because I don't want to have too much orange. I like to have the orange just a little bit lighter. And I'm going to go to the next one, and I'm just going to do that again. I'm going to just pull down the yellow into the orange. And for this one, because it's a little bit too orange for my liking, I'm going to actually cover all this with the yellow, and that'll make the orange just a little bit lighter. And for mine, if there is any part where the black or brown is coming through, that's when I'm going to cover it with a little bit of white and let that dry. And that will take all of the background away. And I'm actually going to do that with the petals that go in front as well. I think I'm going to make this one a little bit of a more of a point. I don't like how it's so rounded. A nice part about part painting, you could change it as you go if there's parts that you like, if you don't like. So I think that actually looks a little bit better. And you can kind of see with the white that I'm just fixing all the edges. And if I keep the white closer to the tip, that will actually make the yellow stand out a little bit more on the edges. So it will look a little bit more brighter at the edges, which is what you want because it'll be the edge of the painting. The edge of the petals that are supposed to stand out more. Now with mine, you can kind of see that a lot of my stuff, if you can turn it back so you can see it. Sometimes the way I do things, it's a little bit random, but I usually just go with what I feel is necessary for each painting. So like this one, I have to do again now that it's dry. Okay, so then for those back colors, the back petals, I'm actually going to go over them again. I'm going to go over them with the yellow. And you'll really start to see now that the tips are much more yellow. And they look really nice. And sometimes if you go through it and you start to see that you might need a little bit more orange because it just needs a little bit to be a little bit darker, you can always add just a little bit in. Now I also, when it comes to petals, again, you just have to go up and down or never go side to side because you want to try to keep those lines in place. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit more orange to this one. I'm just going to pull it up in the middle. You want to keep the colors kind of like the shape of the tip of it, where the middle is taller and the sides are down a little bit, but you also want to keep a little bit of the orange to the sides right here. You don't want to have too much yellow because you want to make sure that it looks like it's underneath. But you don't want too much of it. Okay. I'm going to do the same with over here. And I'm going to do the same thing for the next one. Now, even though if you do decide right now you think that it's a good color, the back color, you don't, you're good to go, you're happy with how all the colors came out, you could always go back and fix it just a little bit later when you do the front. So don't worry that if you finish this spot and then you go back and you start doing the petals on top of it and you're like, oh man, this one is a little bit too dark, you could always fix it later. And I'm sure it's going to happen to me. And I will show you how to do the backward stuff if you have to. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the petals that are on top, and it is the same thing. So there's just a little bit more practice, and if you do start getting more of a hang of it, you could always, like I said, you can always go back and you can fix the ones underneath. So I'm going to start with the farthest one, and this one's a little bit harder to do because mine is kind of coming off the page a little bit, but that's totally okay. So I'm going to take my orange and I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, and I'm just going to pull up. I'm going to take my yellow and I'm going to pull down. Now, because you have this one over the petal underneath, you may want to make sure that you go over it all. And sometimes with the yellow, it will go through, so it's really hard to see where your line is. A lot of times I'll just take that white and I'll just do the outside, and that will help you see exactly where the edge of your line, but don't do too much white, do a little bit. And want to touch your canvas or your slate just lightly, just like if you're trying to tickle it with a feather. And I'm going to do the other side. And that will help it stand out a little bit more, and you can definitely see that it is on top of the other one. And then once that white is there, then I'm going to go over it again with the yellow, and that'll help that yellow stand out more. I think I'm going to add a little bit more orange to the bottom there. So now you can kind of see that this petal is on top of this one because this one is lighter. I'm going to go on to the next one. I'm going to take a little bit of orange, go up the center and towards the sides. And I'm going to grab the yellow and start from the top. I'm going to work my way down. Now, what I like to do, and depending on your drawing, you can always add it or fix it or change it however you want. I always like to have the top petals touching the ones that are next to it. So right here, this is a little too skinny for me. So I'm actually going to take the white, add a little bit more white to my palette. And I'm just going to draw it out. Okay, that looks good. Now I think I'm actually going to thicken up the last one. I'm going to let that fully dry. That's definitely not the shading I want, but I want to have it fully dry, and that way I can go back again. And we're going to do the same thing on the next one and so forth. And again, sometimes you can go back and forth. You don't always have to go in the same direction I go. Sometimes it's different with each painting. It's just as long as you have, you know what steps to do, you can go in any order that you want. Adding a layer or having a little bit less, just always remember to make sure that your paint is dry so you don't pull up the paint underneath and that it doesn't blend into the colors underneath. This one I'm actually going to straighten out a little bit more. Okay, so now I have about my first layer done, and it looks a little bit of a mess, but don't worry because you're going to keep going over and blending it. So again, pick the side that's a little bit more dry and go over again. And then once I finally get to a point where I'm like, I do like a lot of it, I'm just gonna try to highlight some of the areas like on the tops and the sides just to pull it together and to make sure that everything is standing out where I need it to stand out and it doesn't look like it's not on top of the other one. And a lot of times what you could use the white underneath and have it pull through. Okay, so I actually think I'm actually done with how mine looks. I am happy with the darker sides on the bottom and having the lighter sides over here, so it makes it look like it's on top of each other. That's one of the hardest things to accomplish, and plus the blending. So if you were actually okay, oops, I shouldn't have done that. If you were actually okay with this, then the next step we're actually going to be doing under the right where the center is. So the next step is what we're going to do is we're actually going to take our dark brown and we're going to take the black and we're going to put about a dime size on your palette. And I'm going to take the same paintbrush that has a little bit of yellow or an orange in it, and I'm going to take the brown and I'm going to actually just start tapping. I'm not going to paint it on. I'm going to tap, and that will kind of give it that like bubbled kind of look. If that makes sense. And I'm just going to go to the edge, and I'm not going to make it a perfect circle. I want to have it a little like wobbly, because if you look at the inside, they're never a perfect circle. They're always you will see some of the seeds and stuff like that. And I'm going to pretty much put a rainbow around it. And I think I'm actually going to make this a little thicker. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the black and I'm going to do the same thing in the center. Now, all of your paint should be a little wet still. So I'm going to go by the edges and I'm going to just start dabbing the edges lightly. And you should start seeing that it's going to start blending. And that way it doesn't look like there's a definite line between the black and the brown. A little bit more black here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of black and I'm going to actually dab my palette just like that to get some of the paint off. I'm just going to have a little black on the edges. That's hard to see. So it just looks like it is tinted black. There's not that much. It's almost like I dyed the bristles black, but there's not a lot of paint on it. And I'm just going to dab a little bit in the brown. So you could just see a little tiny bit. I'm going to go all the way around. And then I'm just going to go back and try to get more paint off my paintbrush. And I'm going to go back and I'm just going to dab it so it doesn't look like too much of circles, or you can kind of see exactly what it is. So I'm going to blend it back into the brown. I'm going to take a little bit of the brown. I'm going to do the same in the black. And that will start to tie in the center with the outside. And then with the brown that I have on here, I'm just going to go to the edges and I'm just barely going to touch the edges. So you can kind of see a little bit of that fuzziness right at the edges. One of our last steps for the center part is you want to take, just like we did the center, you want to take a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of that yellow and you want to dab it where it was barely on your paintbrush, and you want to do the same thing with the yellow. You just want to do it on the outer part, not towards the center. And that just gives it a little bit of a highlight in the middle. And if you do put a little bit too much of the yellow, don't worry, because you can always wipe some off of your paintbrush. You can go back and you can just keep dabbing where it starts to blend in with the background. Okay, so I am happy with the way that looks. And then if you do paint on slate, the one thing I do recommend is I recommend to spray this with polyurethane. If it's on canvas, you don't have to. And the last but not least, you always have to sign your artwork. I personally, I do not like the way signatures look, and I always hate putting my signature on things because I always feel like it takes away from the painting. So I'm going to put it where I feel like not many people will see it. I'm going to put it right on the bottom. I'm going to put it in orange so it doesn't show too much. Okay, so I initialed it, which is my signature. And I believe I am all done. If you want, you could always look back at your painting and see if there's any imperfections that you want to clean up a little bit around the edges. If you did make a mistake, don't forget to look in the corners to see if you need to fill it in with black again. Another thing that I always look at, let's say you're looking at your painting and you kind of think there's something wrong with it, but you can't put your finger on it. What I always do is I'll take a picture with my phone and I will look at it in my phone app. And for some reason, I'm able to see all of my imperfections that way. My mother-in-law, who does the majority of the canvas work on our Facebooks and website, she actually holds up her artwork in front of the mirror, and that's where she sees a lot of her imperfections. So there's two ways of looking at your artwork within a different perspective to see if you like it or not and make sure that it's all done. Also, when it comes to your paintbrushes, I did notice that if you wash your paintbrushes with hand soap, sometimes the paintbrushes will still be hard afterwards. You won't be able to get all the paint out of it. So I noticed that if I use Dawn dish soap, that takes all the paint out of my paintbrushes and they last the longest that way. If you do have trouble with your paintbrushes fraying, which will happen to the most expensive paintbrushes down to the cheapest paintbrushes, a lot of people told me, and it does work, if you take your paintbrushes and you clean them off and you lay them in the paper towel and you put a book on top of them or something heavy just to flatten it out, you could do that in in the worst case scenarios, or a lot of times if you just lay them out on a piece of paper and make sure that they're flat, they usually shouldn't fray too much. Other than that, I think that is everything. I would love if you would, once you are done with your completed project, if you would take a picture of it and post it on our Facebook group or any other sunflower groups. That is great advertising for us, and we truly, truly appreciate it. Word of mouth is one of our best advertising, so that will help us out a tremendous amount. Also, we have 2 promotions going on. If you do recommend this class or any of our classes to a friend, and they do sign up and let us know that you were the reason that they took the class, then you can get your next class at 50% off. So just remember to have your friend tell us that you were the one that sent you there, and you can get it off. And it's not just limited to one. If you recommend 10 friends and they all sign up, that's 10 classes you can get at 50% off. We also have, if you take 3 classes, you can get the 4th one for free. And I will keep track of that with my website. It will let us know how many classes that you have taken. So those are the 2 things. And again, I really appreciate you joining our class. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were able to relax and that you learned a couple things. Thank you again, and be safe out there. Bye-bye.